saying that, oh, tank is just rock, paper, scissors is total garbage. When you talk about why the tank, rock, paper, scissors is a myth, there's number one, because you shouldn't be focusing on the tank, rock, paper, scissors 90% of the time. If I'm playing on Watch Point Gibraltar with all the high ground in the world, why am I sitting on cart and trading with a Zarya? Why? And yet that happens at almost every rank. But number two, when people go to counter you in the rock, paper, scissors, the fact that they first off swapped off of the hero that they wanted to play to counter you is great for your team. But you also need to be willing to change what you're doing to get value out of just existing or baiting or switching up your playstyle. And people don't want to do that, or they don't know how to do that. And that's the problem. One of the weaknesses out of having one tank is that there is no supplementary complement to your tank's weaknesses. For example, in Overwatch 1, Winston is a really good dive tank, but he really struggles if he has to close the distance on the enemy backline. For example, if that's a composition I gotta dive over there, as I'm diving, I'm taking 1,000,000 damage and I'm like dead by the time I get there, right? That's a Winston weakness. Now there's ways of compensating that and playing around that, of course, but in Overwatch 2, you'd have a bubble to help you close the distance. You would have Matrix to help you close the distance. If I'm playing Orisa, the weakness of Orisa is that she's very strong frontline presence from range, but she's terrible in controlling off angles, right? She's very fragile to flanks. Well, that's why you play Orisa Diva or Orisa Sigma or something along those lines, whether it was a brawl comp or a spam comp, to kind of control off angles for you to complement your strengths and your weaknesses. Now, in Overwatch 2, you now have tanks that don't have that second tank to complement their weaknesses. And so what you've introduced is the equivalent of a rock, paper, scissors, where my tank's weaknesses are countered by your tank's strengths, because I'm playing Winston into an Orisa who is shooting me before I can even dive. And then as I dive, she harpoons me, stuns me, and then I'm dead. Or maybe even she boops me away out of my bubble so I get spammed. And there's no Zarya bubble. There's no Diva Matrix to stop that from happening. If I'm playing, oh, I don't know, Doomfist, okay? And I create a ton of space in the backline, but then their Jungler Queen just freaking shouts, and it's over. It's just cooked. Like, she just completely countered my entire engage, right? That's what's being said. Now, let's talk about the little things. One thing that Overwatch 2 did is they gave a lot of the more, I wouldn't say one-dimensional, but like more, for lack of a better term, myopic. Very simple, one-directional, single-visioned tanks. They gave them more utility in how they did that. For example, Winston now has a little bit of range, right? A tank that doesn't have any poke whatsoever has a little bit of range that allows him to poke out some DPS, that allows his dives to be that much better. Reinhardt, who lacked mobility and relied off of his other tank to complement him, has the ability to not only control pin more for better mobility, but also cancel it at any point in time, and also can throw 2 fire strikes instead of 1. So he has actual range here. And so what Overwatch 2 development did is they essentially added tank utility for the most part across the board that covered the weaknesses of each and every tank, so that they're more flexible in their matchups. All right? But that's not even my main point. You see, why all of this that I'm saying is total garbage is because you notice something that we haven't talked about. You pick Orisa, you counter Doomfist. You pick Doomfist, you counter, I don't know, Winston. You pick Zarya, then they can't play Diva. Is that the other roles? Right. So much of the tank, rock, paper, scissors, moronic behavior in terms when it comes to that is because everybody is only focused on the tank versus the tank. And they don't think about the map, and they don't think about the compositional matchup. This is a classic plat check. Guys, does Diva get countered by Zarya? And if you're in plat, I'm kind of joking here, but they're like, well, yeah, right? Because if you stand here and shoot at each other, the Zarya just beams you down and you can't matrix it. But the question is why are you standing in front of the Zarya? Why are you trading with the Zarya? Your strength is not to shoot her. Your strength is your mobility, whereas Zarya has next to none. Avoid her, trade backlines, something that Zarya cannot do. And this happens all the time. If I'm playing Doomfist and I'm struggling with Junker Queen. Now, I get it. Junker Queen is strong right now. So she's so strong that or even her weaknesses aren't that bad. But at least in theory, if I'm playing Doomfist into Junker Queen, yes, I'm going to struggle a little bit. But also, why am I worrying about the Junker Queen? Who cares? Why am I concerned about the Junker Queen? In fact, if you want to look at the real tank counters, you guys want to talk about a real tank counter? You know what the best counter to Orisa is? Zarya. Why is Zarya the best counter to Orisa? Because how does an Orisa avoid a Zarya? How does she avoid the tank trade? Right, it's really hard to avoid the tank trade as Orisa versus a Zarya. And that's why the counter feels very ugly. Now, there are ways to play around it, and that's the other thing, that people don't like to adapt their playstyle and figure out solutions. They're too willing to complain, but it's more understandable. And you guys remember me talking with Boger, right? What's the best Winston counter in the game? What's the best Winston counter in the game? It's Diva, not Bastion, not Reaper. You can avoid Bastion and Reaper. You can avoid the bad matchup and still find value. That's the whole point. But Diva matches his ability to avoid her and says, no, you can't ignore me. I'm going to match you and I'm going to shoot you. Right? Now, even with Diva, even with that rock, paper, scissors, what's the problem with Diva mobility? You heard me right. The problem with Diva mobility. You're so much slower than Winston. So Winston technically can access your backline or a squishy, and you're sitting there like chugga, 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 but it's too late. The Winston's already got value. So if you play really smart as Winston, you can a lot of times avoid Diva on your engages, or at least make her very late to the party. The other thing that happens with the tank rock, paper, scissors that people fail is the psychological aspect of it. I will agree with this. Here's your catchphrase, okay? When it comes to countering, it is too easy to counter in the tank trade right now. I agree with that. I think if you look at the quote-unquote high skiller heroes versus heroes like Junker Queen that can kind of exist and just get too much value, there's a balance problem for sure. However, you need to adapt if you want to play Doomfist into counters. And that's something that most players are unable or unwilling to do. And the reason why that is because number one, it's hard. And here's the second reason. You guys want to get the psychology of this? If I am playing Doomfist into Orisa, Sombra, Moira, Brig, I don't know. Where does my value come from? Forcing shifts, nothing else. Right. Your entire value is through staying alive, baiting attention, forcing shifts, off angles, bait their cooldowns, right? And that's the problem, is people don't like that. If I'm playing Doomfist, I want to kill him, man! I want to get in there and punch your teeth in! Yeah! Right? It's not fun going in there and baiting cooldowns. So what happens is then when they hard counter me, do people adjust? No. Because either they're too unintelligent or too unexperienced to do so, or inexperienced, or they just don't want to. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to force the trying to get kills because that's the funnest thing to do. And that's the problem, is if you try to force playing Doomfist into Sombra, there's nothing wrong with that. But the way that you change might not be as satisfying. Now, I would disagree to an extent. I find sometimes baiting a lot of cooldowns. I've played Winston. I even played Winston on stream. Do you guys remember the Hollywood game where they went Reaper Bastion? And I played Ring Around the Rosie with them and I was still getting kills? I mean, I freaking dominated them. And I'm not even a good Winston player. That was fun to me. But you know what? Some people aren't going to have fun doing that. And they're not going to be happy about that. They're going to want to show up, play the game on the hero that they want to, play it the exact same way with the exact same value, and they want to get rewards. So when you talk about why the tank rock, paper, scissors is a myth, there's number one, because you shouldn't be focusing on the tank rock, paper, scissors 90% of the time. If I'm playing on Watch Point Gibraltar with all the high ground in the world, why am I sitting on cart and trading with a Zarya? Why? And yet that happens at almost every rank. But number two, when people go to counter you in the rock, paper, scissors, the fact that they first off swapped off of the hero that they wanted to play to counter you is great for your team. But you also need to be willing to change what you're doing to get value out of just existing or baiting or switching up your playstyle. And people don't want to do that, or they don't know how to do that. And that's the problem. Now, once again, I'm not saying that hard counters and some variation of rock, paper, scissors doesn't, because of course it exists to an extent. But saying that, oh, tank is just rock, paper, scissors is total garbage. And it generally shows a lack of understanding of the map, of the matchups, an unwillingness to adapt, and an incapability to play the map, and also an incapability of focusing tank. Chat, how many VOD reviews have I done on tank, DPS, and support? And let's just say tank for now, and said, stop focusing the tank. You moron. 22. Okay. I swear it's almost everyone. Everyone. So when you get countered as a tank, and yet we still have people focusing tank, no wonder people think that it's a tank rock, paper, scissors. I don't know if it's leftovers from Overwatch 1 when tanks were squishier. I don't know if it's just because it's dopamine and it's easier to focus tank. I think that's definitely a large point of it. But it's the reason why people have so many problems, because when you say Zarya is countered by D.Va, or D.Va is countered by Zarya, it's because what do you think 90% of D.Va players are doing too much? So what can you do? What can we do? Well, first things first, let's have a little bit of humility, and I'll show a little bit of, not disrespect, but call out the balance team a little bit. I think heroes like Orisa should have more dynamic, and maybe their existence shouldn't be as much of a counter. I think you can look at heroes like Junker Queen and being like, this was overtuned. If I play Winston really well, I can beat a Junker Queen, but it takes a disproportionate amount of skill to counter what Junker Queen can do by just existing. That's bad balance. So we can call that out when we see it. But the problem is when you call it out indiscriminately and say tank, rock, paper, scissors, and Overwatch, right? Yes, but only in very specific examples. When you paint with a broad brush, your feedback is bad and you make yourself look like an ass. So if you're struggling with tank counters, stop shooting tank and get good at learning to adapt. And also, relook your understanding of the map matchups. If you are playing Winston into Junker Queen on Circuit Royale, are you going to be struggling with tank, rock, paper, scissors? At least a little bit. Maybe not on second point, but on first point, it's much harder to avoid the tank mirror because the map doesn't allow for me to play to my strengths. But then, ladies and gentlemen, is the problem the rock, paper, scissors of the matchup? Or is the problem the map? Right. It's not the matchup. It's not the rock, paper, scissors. It's the map, right? Junker Queen is better equipped for this map. And unless we want to destroy and make every hero only dynamic, no strengths at all, which, you know, maybe you could argue that, you know, Junker Queen is a little bit too strong at her niche and too weak out of it. But it's the map. It's not the matchup. And even then, if you were to force Winston on this, you could. But if you sit here and go, zap on the queen, y'all. Oh, I got, you know, well, duh. You gotta at least try something. You gotta at least adapt, bait them into here maybe. Okay, Junker Queen's pushing me. Now I jump backline back here. Maybe we play the off angle cover. Maybe we play more for second point than for first, right? So first point's a little bit of a wash, but second point I have to hide the high ground. And even then, there's still ways to adapt. Stop focusing tanks and adapt your playstyle. Especially in Overwatch 2, there's so many ways that you can adapt your playstyle. For example, with Reinhardt. Remember we talked about Dive Reinhardt, right? Cloudy, right? Cloudy made that one famous. But I'm going to ego moment a little bit here. I was talking about it before Cloudy was even famous for it. Cloudy was doing it, but wasn't made famous for it. I talked about clear high ground, clear off angles with Reinhardt. Use your pin, right? And people thought I was crazy. And now, but it was hard. It's even easier in Overwatch 2 to do that. I'm learning to play into tank counters, ex-Diva and Zarya. I've tried going for backline. I'm trying to use my mobility and not fight the front line because that's not my strength. Oftentimes what happens is my team dies and says the Zarya can walk on me for free. Should I try to look and get better at getting the value I can get, or should I understand the team's weakness to try to help them? No. So like, here's the thing. If the Zarya will be able to walk on your backline for free. However, she's not as equipped to walk on your backline as you are equipped at going on theirs. So I think there are always exceptions to the rule. When I say Diva is able to avoid the Zarya, the avoiding the Zarya is the value. Now, avoiding the Zarya and going for DPS on the flank or going for the backline, it depends. Like, it's not a very simple answer, but the Diva is better equipped to go on backline than the Zarya is because she lacks mobility. So if your team is dying to a Zarya, most of the time it's your backline's fault. Don't worry about it. I'm gonna be honest, Winston into Queen right now feels really bad. I was trying to play Winston into Queen, so it might just be the map. It's the map. Winston into Queen is hard because she does have some ways of dealing with your engages. But Moon Queen Street's a very open map, which is good for your jumps, but it means you take a lot of damage. How do you play Sigma into Orisa? Okay. You chat, you guys tell me. How do you play Sigma into Orisa? Range, right. So all you need to do is either poke the Orisa's backline from range, where she's not very good at poking compared to you. She's going to have a much harder time getting reasonable and valuable poke on your backline compared to hers. Or you could poke the Orisa at range, and she will be forced to blow a cooldown to close the distance. I just did a replay code the other day where I played Sigma into Rein. I was talking about this, and I demonstrated how to play Sigma into Reinhardt. Same kind of thing, right? Now Orisa has slightly more poke than Rein, but it's not significant poke. How to play Queen versus Ball, do a better job trading their backlines, or hit a knife on him and trade better HP. Should they make the matchups easier though? Like the Winston into Junker Queen is extremely hard, should it be less so? I think to an extent you could make a good argument for that, yes. How do you play Zarya into Rein? Yeah, avoid the Rein. Either avoid the Rein and poke his backline or poke off angles, which he cannot do, or keep him at range so that you're able to burn his HP and shield before he closes the distance. Very similar to how you play Sigma into Rein. What about when the map is not great for you versus the enemy tanks? Then yes, you do have a problem. If I'm playing Orisa into Zarya on Circuit Royale, I'm going to have a hard time. So you have both when you have both a map problem and a soft counter problem, then you do have a little bit of rock, paper, scissors.